back in the 80s and 90s, there weren't many who roamed the streets of Queens without a mix of fear and respect for Kenneth Supreme McGriff and his crew of ruthless gangsters, known as the Supreme Team. Amongst the many small-time street hustlers who didn't dare cross Supreme or his crew, one man stood out as an exception. This man wasn't afraid to confront them. His name was Troy Singleton, better known as Big Nose Troy. In an era when Queens was teeming with heavy hitters like Prince, 50 Cent, and Fat Cat Nichols, Troy was one of the few who didn't back down. He was part of a new wave of street legends who didn't care about the old guard's reputation. Growing up tight with the likes of Prodigy from Mobb Deep and his brother and right-hand man, E Moneybags, Big Nose Troy was involved in multiple robberies in Queens and surrounding areas as a youngster. This earned him a reputation as someone you didn't want to mess with, an incident that later came back to bite him. After Troy saw the name of one of the Supreme Team's members on the documents that incriminated him for a double hit, he and his brother E Moneybags declared war on the Supreme Team, spending several months running down and slapping up anyone connected to Supreme. It was a bold move. After Troy smacked around some of Supreme's closest associates, including Irv Gotti and Ron Gunnar Robinson, Supreme put a price on his head. That bounty caught up with him in October 2001 when he was brutally executed outside the Club Van Wyck on Liberty Avenue in South Jamaica, Queens. The story of how this OG Street legend declared war on Supreme and his crew and paid the ultimate price is a long one. Troy Singleton, aka Big Nose Troy, was born in Queens in 1968. There isn't a lot of public information about him, and different sources have varying details about his origins, making it hard to pinpoint exactly when he was born. Despite the scarcity of information on Troy compared to other big players from Queens like Supreme McGriff, 50 Cent, and Fat Cat, his presence on the streets of New York was undeniable. Along with 50 Cent E Moneybags, Troy was one of the few not afraid of Kenneth Supreme McGriff, leader of the Supreme Team. What set Troy apart as a young man was that he embodied a new generation of street dudes who didn't care about the old guard's reputation. When I say the old guard, I mean the one made famous by the likes of Supreme Prince and Fat Cat Nichols. Suffering from sickle cell anemia, a painful and limiting condition, Troy formed a tight bond with Prodigy from Mobb Deep, who had the same disease. It's said that when Prodigy was in the hospital, Troy would visit him often, even bringing him food from Red Lobster. That's a real brother. Another person Troy was especially close to throughout his life was Eric Smith, also known as E Moneybags. The same E Moneybags who accidentally hit Colbert Black just Johnson while trying to kill Supreme outside Jamaica Coliseum Mall back in '99. Growing up, E and Troy were partners in crime, involved in all kinds of robberies and stick-ups in Jamaica and its surrounding areas. Over the years, Big Nose Troy and E Moneybags became two of the Supreme Team's biggest enemies, which didn't end well for either party. If you're enjoying this video, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. In addition to being a close brother to E Moneybags, who hated Supreme and his crew more than anyone else, Troy had his own reasons to want to take the Supreme Team down. Most people might already know why E Moneybags hated the Supreme Team, but if you don't, let me break it down for you. Before he ended up getting thrown into prison for life, Supreme was selling tagged cars through a woman named Z. When E decided to buy a car from Supreme, he was told to put down a $1,000 payment, which he gave to Z. After putting down the payment, E changed his mind and decided to use the money for a down payment on a new Lincoln Navigator instead of buying a tagged car. When he personally asked Supreme for a refund, Supreme treated him like a fool and refused to give it back. This triggered a legendary beef that ended with the tragic accidental death of Black just in '99. As for Big Nose Troy, his beef with the Supreme Team had a different origin. In July of '95, a basketball tournament called the Peace Tournament was held in Baisley Pond Park in South Jamaica, Queens, in honor of two men killed by a police officer in December of '94. The tournament, held near the ball court, saw about 300 people from the Baisley Park projects cheering the teams on. During the second half, something tragic happened that stained the memory of the peace tournament forever. 5 minutes into the second half, shots were fired on the court. It was unclear who exactly had opened fire, but once the shootout was over, 2 spectators were dead and several others were injured. The 2 deceased were Pierre Mitchell and Jamal Adams. Even though the cops had a hard time identifying who was involved in the shootout, which was confirmed to be drug-related, Troy was eventually identified in a lineup at the 113th precinct and taken to the Big House for second-degree murder. One big thing to remember about the incident is that the Baisley Park projects were home turf to none other than Supreme, making it a pretty bad move on Troy's part to start killing people on that court. Though the peace tournament shooting and ensuing chaos were detailed by author Ethan Brown in his revealing book Queens Reign Supreme in 2010, some information on Troy's involvement just came to light recently. As Big Nose Troy was being taken in for his alleged participation in the shootout, a Supreme team member allegedly gave a statement against him. Word on the street is that James Beamy Anthony was also set to sign an affidavit and testify against Troy. Even though Beamy didn't end up testifying and Troy was allowed to walk, he took it personally that he was about to be ratted out. This incident fueled Troy's hatred towards Supreme's crew. After what happened with his brother E Moneybags getting cheated out of his money and the double hit incrimination, Troy and E Moneybags decided to do the unthinkable and declare war on the Supreme team. When I say war, I mean war. Anyone associated with the Supreme team became an enemy. He and E Moneybags walked the streets of Queens, pistol whipping, smacking and slapping up dozens of dudes affiliated with Supreme, stoking the fire of a war everyone knew would end in tragedy. Troy hated Supreme and his crew so much that he stalked some of his gang members outside Universal Records offices. He allegedly ran down on his ops and slapped the daylight out of them in the middle of the day on Broadway, the busiest street in all of New York. You might think that would be enough to vent his anger, but no. Big Nose Troy took it further and hit Supreme where it hurt, going after his men at Murder Inc., his beloved record label. During his rampage, Troy ran down on Ja Rule's manager, Ron Gutter Robinson, and smacked him around. Around the same time, Troy and Nathan Green Eye Born May, another OG Street legend, hunted down Irv Gotti, one of Supreme's closest brothers and the head of Murder Inc., and beat him up as well. By 2001, Supreme had enough of Troy and decided to hit 2 birds with 1 stone. According to official documents from his later court trial, Supreme enlisted the help of Emmanuel Dog Mosley, a member of his crew. According to Mosley's testimony, Supreme asked him to put together a team of hitmen to take out E Moneybags and Big Nose Troy, putting up a $50,000 bounty for their heads. In Supreme's eyes, E Moneybags had to be killed in retaliation for hitting Black Just, and Troy had to be put down for what he did at the peace tournament and all the other chaos he caused after that incident. In Dog's own words, he organized a crew of hitmen at Supreme's request. Unfortunately for E Moneybags, he was the first one they found. He was killed in his car in July 2001. 3 months later, on October 28th, with the help of hitmen like Aaron Granson, Mosley's team caught up with Troy and executed him outside a club on Liberty Avenue in South Jamaica while he was on his way back to his car. After getting hit 8 times, Troy had no chance of surviving. For several months after taking out Troy, Mosley and his crew kept searching for Green Eye Born but never found him. The hits on Troy and E Moneybags were significant reasons why Supreme ended up getting sentenced to life in prison in 2007, a sentence he's still serving at USP McCreary in Pine Knot, Kentucky. For a man who once ruled the streets of Queens with an iron fist, things ended pretty terribly for Supreme. All his co-defendants ratted him out at the first chance they got. Despite his defense arguing that both E Moneybags and Big Nose Troy were threats to his life, The judge didn't buy it. Regardless of all the beef and the chaos they caused in the streets, it's a real shame Troy had to go out like that. Rest in peace to that man. To this day, Big Nose Troy is still remembered as an OG legend of the streets of Queens, and his legacy remains on through his son, Troy Jr., who has launched a decently successful rap career. About a year before his passing, 50 Cent shouted him out on Ghetto Corin. With the lyrics coming up, I heard sipping too much booze will leave you confused. And if you watch the news, you see players in the game they lose. I'm forgetting Lefty and Jazz. Pretty Tony and Lance had Luke, Melon, Troy, and E Moneybags. Through his family and songs like these, Troy's memory lives on. It's crazy how these gangsters end up doing completely different things. Troy and E Moneybags, fatalities of the street life, Supreme serving a life sentence, and 50 Cent. Well, 50 Cent became one of New York's most notorious street legends. Even if not as much as known about him as other legendary gangsters of that era, his mark on the streets will never be erased. The story of Troy Singleton, known as Troy, is a gripping saga of defiance, loyalty, and the brutal reality of street life in Queens. Despite the scarcity of public information compared to other notorious figures of his time, Troy's impact on the streets remains indelible. In the 80s and 90s, he was part of a new generation of street legends who didn't respect the old guard, including Supreme McGriff and his Supreme team. Troy's story is a testament to the relentless, often tragic nature of street warfare and the high stakes involved in the pursuit of respect and retribution. Troy's close ties with Prodigy from Mobb Deep and his brother E Moneybags shaped much of his early years. Their shared battle with sickle cell anemia created a bond that went beyond the streets, exemplifying the human side of these street legends. Despite his illness, Troy was known for his fearlessness, and his reputation quickly grew. His partnership with E Moneybags saw them involved in numerous robberies and confrontations, positioning them as formidable adversaries to the Supreme team. The beef between E Moneybags and Supreme over a mere $1,000 down payment was more than just a financial dispute. It was a catalyst for a legendary feud that would have deadly consequences. Supreme's refusal to refund the money led to escalating tensions, culminating in the tragic accidental death of Black, just one of Supreme's associates. For Troy, the animosity towards the Supreme team was personal and compounded by his own experiences, including an incident at the Peace Tournament in Baisley Pond Park, where he was implicated in a shooting that left 2 dead. The Peace Tournament incident was a turning point for Troy. Being identified in a lineup and nearly ratted out by a Supreme team member fueled his hatred. The animosity only intensified after the Supreme team member's betrayal. Troy and E Moneybags declared all-out war on the Supreme team, a decision that would lead to a series of violent confrontations across Queens. They targeted anyone associated with Supreme, including high-profile figures like Irv Gotti and Ja Rule's manager, Ron Gutter Robinson. These brazen attacks were a direct challenge to Supreme's authority and reputation. Supreme's response was swift and brutal. Enlisting Emmanuel Dog Mosley and his crew, Supreme placed a $50,000 bounty on the heads of Troy and E Moneybags. The hit on E Moneybags in July 2001 was the first to be executed. 3 months later, in October 2001, Troy was ambushed and executed outside a club on Liberty Avenue. The coordinated hits were part of Supreme's strategy to eliminate threats and restore his dominance. However, these actions only contributed to his downfall. The murders were a significant factor in Supreme's eventual life sentence, which he continues to serve to this day. Troy Singleton's story is a poignant reminder of the harsh realities of street life. His defiance, loyalty to his friends, and ultimate fate highlight the cyclical nature of violence and retribution that defines the lives of many involved in the drug trade and gang conflicts. Despite his tragic end, Troy's legacy remains on. His son, Troy Jr., has found success in the rap world, ensuring that his father's name and story continue to resonate. In the annals of Queen Street history, Troy's tale stands as a stark narrative of a man who, despite overwhelming odds and the looming shadow of the Supreme Team, chose to stand his ground. His story is a testament to the complex, often tragic lives of those who navigate the perilous world of street crime, leaving a legacy that endures beyond their years. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment for more interesting videos.